Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. David Shiffman, and I am an interdisciplinary marine conservation biologist who studies sharks and how to protect them. Longtime Elasma Week fans may recognize me as the host from last year. This year, I was invited to speak about some of my research and the outreach work that I do related to recreational shark fishing, which is considered an emerging conservation issue. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the concept of recreational shark fishing as a conservation challenge in general, some of my research on recreational shark fishing in Florida specifically, and end with some of how my science communication and public science engagement work helped to change Florida's fishing laws to protect endangered sharks. So as you may know, many species of sharks are in trouble. They face significant conservation challenges. And overall, unsustainable commercial scale overfishing, which includes both fishing for fins and for shark meat, which includes both target catch and bycatch, is the greatest threat by far. However, recreational fishing, which is fishing for fun, often with a small boat or not even with a boat at all from something like a fishing pier, is increasingly considered to be an emerging conservation threat, especially for some species that are already in trouble because of commercial fishing. If you've ever gone fishing for fun, you may catch a fish every hour or so, and you may wonder how that compares to the giant fishing vessels that you see in Greenpeace campaigns. Well, let me explain why recreational fishing can be a conservation challenge. The big difference is scale. Yes, one person going fishing for fun does not catch anywhere near as many fish as one industrial scale fishing vessel, but there are a lot of people who go fishing for fun. In total, an estimate says that almost 50 billion fish are caught by recreational anglers every year, a number that does not count those that are thrown back but don't survive the process. There are many threatened species of fish whose populations are so low that commercial fisheries for them are already banned, but they are targeted by recreational anglers in the United States and around the world. And in the US specifically, more than a third of total catch for some species of conservation concern comes from the recreational sector. It is indeed an important conservation issue. And if you'd like to see throughout this talk, I'll include references to some technical literature. All of mine is available open access on my website. But if you'd like a more plain language, non-technical summary, I wrote an article about this for the environmental news site, The Revelator, last year. So that's recreational fishing in general. What about recreational fishing for sharks? Well, I've given a lot of talks at conferences in my day, and only once has the audience audibly gasped when I said something. And it was when I reported this result. In 2013, which has also has been true of every year since then, more large sharks in the United States were caught by recreational anglers than by commercial fishermen. People gasped, an audience full of shark scientists, when I reported this. The large sharks part here is key because the largest commercial fishery in the United States is for spiny dogfish, which are a smaller species. But still, this shows that this is something worth taking very seriously from both research and management. So why Florida? Well, part of it is I was doing my Ph.D. at the University of Miami, but Florida is an excellent natural laboratory for studying some of these issues because it is a recreational fishing hotspot. They call it the fishing capital of the world. This was one of the finalists for the Florida State Quarter a few years ago, and many of the towns, especially in the Florida Keys, have not only fish, but fishing gear in their town seal. In Florida, millions of anglers, both locals and people who come there just for the opportunity, spend billions of dollars a year fishing. And Florida has one of the largest recreational shark fishing markets on Earth. Since that paper was published in 1993, Texas has emerged as another recreational shark fishing hotspot, and the North Carolina Outer Banks are starting to, but Florida is still the biggest and is definitely the oldest. So first, I want to talk about charter boat fishing. If you want to learn more about this, our 2014 paper about it was featured on the cover of Fisheries. So this is when you don't go fishing on your own boat. It's when you hire someone to charter a fishing boat and take you fishing. This is big business in Florida. There are over 3,000 active charter boat licenses throughout the state. And we identified 137 of these 3,000 that explicitly advertise that you can go shark fishing with them. This is a huge conservative underestimate because many of the other fisheries almost certainly interact with sharks, but these are just the ones that advertise it. And yes, this was a real ad that was used in 2013, so not in the 1980s, by a shark fishing charter company. And we performed what's called a content and discourse analysis of these charter boat companies' websites and advertisements and trade publications, and distributed a voluntary online survey to these 137 charter boat captains. The survey and the content analysis focused on their catch and release policies, what species they caught, how important shark fishing is to them and why, and their perspectives towards conservation. Overall, we found that throughout the state of Florida, you can find these charter boats, but more than half, that's the salmon color sliver, or almost half, that's the salmon color sliver here, are located in the Florida Keys. As for why people go shark fishing, the number one reason was the challenge and excitement of catching a large fish, whereas the least common reason was obtaining fish to eat. What we're describing here is the difference between going deer hunting in the woods near your house on the weekend versus flying halfway around the world to hunt the last rhino. It's important to understand that different motivations for fishing mean that there need to be different ways of dealing with the issue. We also found that these anglers value healthy shark populations for both economic and ecological reasons. These are quotes from some of the fishermen I interviewed. So things like sharks keep the ocean in balance, as well as economic reasons. Quick and reliable fishing makes for a better charter business. I can have more customers if it's more likely that I can catch sharks. So what about catch and release? Only 2 websites explicitly said that they do not practice catch and release, and 82% of survey respondents say they always release. Many of the others say they almost always release. They also report that their customers are just as happy or even happier to release the sharks. This is because they're not eating the sharks. They just want the experience of big game fishing. One of my favorite quotes from this was, "Bring your big boy pants for this fishing," was from an ad. And that was thus far my favorite thing that I have been able to get into the peer-reviewed published literature, though stay tuned on that front. As for why they practice catch and release, these are some quotes from anglers. "I respect the sharks. Why kill them? It's important to keep every shark in the ocean. If you're not going to eat it, why would you kill it?" And my personal favorite quote from my entire PhD dissertation, and I know that this was a charter fisherman in rural Florida and not a Greenpeace activist. "Times have changed, the Jaws craze is over, and with a greater public consciousness towards conservation, catch and release has become the norm." However, there are some folks such as Mark the Shark, who is an infamous in online shark conservation circles, who do not practice catch and release. These are things from his website. Some photos on this fishing site might not be suitable for small children, the faint of heart, or PETA members. Warning, politically incorrect. He's about as charming as you might expect. And he does not practice catch and release, to put it mildly. He claims that he's personally killed about 100,000 sharks in his career, including babies that were in pregnant females he killed. I also know that one of the reasons he's so popular is because celebrities use him, and that builds his brand enormously. This was my first ever celebrity feud was with Rosie O'Donnell, who blocked me over writing this article and refused to comment on it. So I know that with the folks who say they almost always practice catch and release, when they don't, they say we only don't practice catch and release when we're going for what's called an International Game Fish Association, or IGFA, world record. So the IGFA is a group that keeps track of who caught the biggest fish of every species. It's getting one of these awards is considered to be very prestigious in the angling community. But there are problems with this. The biggest individuals in fish populations are the most reproductively important. There's a acronym in fisheries management called BOFs, big, old, fat, fecund females. Basically, the bigger, how many babies a fish can have is directly, and how healthy they are, is directly related to how big the mother is. So intentionally targeting the biggest ones has a disproportionate impact. One fully grown red snapper has the reproductive output of over 200 newly adult red snapper. So this can have huge impacts. And we did a study and found that the IGFA gives these awards, which implicitly require killing the fish. You can't you have to measure it at an IGFA certified weigh station on land, and that requires killing the fish. There are 85 IUCN Red List threatened fish species, including many sharks, that IGFA gives these awards to. There's a petition associated with this research started by the Blue Planet Society. It's now over 50,000 signatures, and this work got a lot of media attention at the time. So these trophy fishers or trophy anglers are a separate subset from general charter anglers. So what about what species they catch? Well, overall, the top species that you see here are the species that match local scientific surveys in the area: blacktip, bull shark, lemon shark, spinner sharks. Yeah, there's a lot of those around. But there's a few things I want to note here. One is hammerheads, which are not among the most common species. And we followed up on this and found that it's because this is a species that is commonly requested by charter boat customers for their perceived value, their perceived fight. So anglers are intentionally targeting these hammerheads. I'll discuss why that's a problem on the next slide. I note also there are several species that are protected here. Any that have a little plus next to them here are species that it is illegal to kill in Florida or sometimes in entire Atlantic waters. I also note that there are several species not found in the Atlantic Ocean that Florida anglers report regularly catching. My favorite example of this was leopard sharks, which are called that because they have these really vibrant spots. They're really common in Southern California. They're a beautiful species, and I have a charter boat captain who says, "Yeah, I catch leopard sharks all the time," and he doesn't because they're not there. But I regret not following up to figure out what he was talking about with this. So let's talk about hammerheads. Hammerheads are commonly caught tens of thousands a year by recreational anglers in Florida, even though they are protected in Florida waters. But they are extremely poor candidates for catch and release and often wash up dead a couple hours after they're released. This is because of their physiological fight response, which was documented by my former lab mate, Dr. Austin Gallagher. They are basically, if you fight a hammerhead for more than 40 minutes or so, it's probably going to die even if you release it. And you talk to some of these anglers and they say, "Oh, we heard that hammerheads are really fragile, so we make sure to fight them for a really, really short time, and we try to limit it to under 2 hours." And they're trying, and I don't want to discourage that, but there are problems here. So let's move on now to land-based recreational shark fishing, which is a different subset of recreational shark fishing. You can check out our paper about this in the journal Fisheries Research. This was also covered in National Geographic and Nature. So when you're fishing from a boat, right before the shark gets to you, it is in the water, which means its organs have the buoyant support of water and it can breathe. When you're fishing from land, from a beach or a fishing pier or a bridge, that's not the case. The shark is exposed to the air. Its organs can be crushed by the weight of its body without the buoyant support of water, and being dragged over wood or concrete or sand can cause significant injury to the animals. This is relatively poorly studied. Part of the reason for this is it was easy for me to get a hold of all of these charter boat captains because they advertise who they are. But these tend to be individual people who go fishing in isolated parts of the beach. And at the time, you didn't need a specific license to be able to do this. It's also a socioeconomically distinct group of anglers. To go charter boat fishing is very expensive. To just drive to the fishing pier or drive to the beach is not as expensive, so it attracts a different group of people. So how did we study this if it's so hard to identify where these people are and how many of them they are? Well, we did something called virtual ethnography, which is social media research, essentially. We found an organization called the South Florida Shark Club, which is the oldest and largest recreational shark fishing club in the world. It's based in South Florida. There are over 1,000 members who have talked about over 50,000 different things. I note here that when you're doing virtual ethnography work, there are serious ethical responsibilities. The people who made these posts did not agree to participate in a research project and were not aware that it was taking place, which means that we took great pains to protect people's individual identities. The problem here is the aggregate behavior, not the individual, not any individual person. And I note with some pride here that this research has been highlighted as an example of highly ethical social media research. So we looked at these posts on the South Florida Shark Club bulletin board and anonymized them. And here are some of the things that we found. First of all, indeed, this is a socioeconomically distinct group of anglers. The recreational fishing community in general in Florida is about 50-50 men and women. It skews older. A lot of retirees go fishing. But the recreational shark fishing, land-based recreational shark fishing community in Florida is overwhelmingly young, male, and self-declared low income. And this was a representative quote from one of these guys. Our way of life is threatened by people who from their million-dollar mansions would rather not have anyone from outside their community coming to their beaches. Interestingly, these anglers were aware of and concerned by shark population declines. I know my face is covering that quote, so I'll read it in a second. But they would regularly say things like shark populations have diminished on a worldwide scale because of overfishing of the commercial fishing fleets of the world. So they recognize there's a problem, but they're saying the problem is not me. Most troublingly here, we documented hundreds of cases of unequivocally illegal fishing behavior and thousands of borderline cases. When we started this project, I was told this isn't really happening that much, and we showed that that's not really the case. We also found strong evidence that anglers are aware that they're breaking the law with quotes like, "I don't care if fishing becomes a felony, I won't stop. We are all outlaws, yeah, now, hell yeah, I'm still sharking, I don't know about you." We also found that these anglers as a community paid a defense attorney to write a script for them for what to say if they are caught breaking the law. We also found evidence that they had bribed a Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission law enforcement officer to give them a heads up when he was going to be patrolling a popular shark fishing beach, so they would be sure to be not there that day. We also found, sure enough, fairly severe physical trauma, including bleeding abrasions from being dragged over rough terrain, sand in the gills, which can cause permanent damage. Imagine never being able to take a full breath of air again for the rest of your life. That's basically what we're talking about here with significant gill damage. These types of injuries would not occur in boat-based fishing. And it is difficult to tell when you're looking at a still photograph, but any of you who have worked with hammerhead sharks know that they are feisty and strong animals. During my PhD work, it would take 4 or 5 undergraduate interns to secure one. Here we have someone holding one with one hand. That is not an alive hammerhead shark. And in terms of policy preferences, again, we see this pattern that, yes, recognizing there's a problem, but the problem is not me, therefore regulation shouldn't impact me. We got comments like this one. The recreational anglers should not be paying the price for the actions of others. The commercial fishermen are the ones that need to have their privileges reduced. We also found attitudes towards scientists that are mixed. And this was my favorite thing that happened with this study. I got this email right after our study was published, and I thought someone was insulting me, but no, that's actually from my dad, who read our paper, saw that a fisherman called me that, and thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard in his life, and immediately just had to email it to me. But anyway, here are some quotes that we found concerning land-based shark fishing angler attitudes towards scientists. This was a doozy. What has happened to our country? When did bogus science and minority groups start governing the rest of us? I don't take much stock in what these alleged scientists have to say, but there were also cases of recognizing that anglers and scientists would be better served to have a working relationship with each other. The attitudes towards the environmental community were not mixed at all. They were entirely negative, including some fairly horrifying things. So at this point, we've shown that recreational shark fishing is a bigger problem than everyone thought it was. So what happens next? Well, research on its own doesn't change policy, so I now want to bring your attention to a case study I published open access in the journal Conservation Science and Practice last year about what happened after we published this work that resulted in the laws getting changed. I note if you're interested in this, the paper is only about 1.5 pages, but there's over 100 pages of supplemental info, including every blog post I ever wrote on this topic, every media interview I ever gave on this topic, the complete text of the policy proposal I wrote, and the letters of support from professional societies. So I just want to briefly note here, while in this case study, I refer to what I did, there was a large coalition involved here of multiple scientists, environmentalists, responsible angling groups, and citizen activists. But the case study here focuses only on my role, and that's because that's what they wanted. So for decades, according to some of my colleagues, certainly for a decade in my own experience, the Florida Fish and Wildlife law enforcement did not address reports of these issues. They refused to investigate or prosecute clear, widely publicized violations of the law concerning sharks, though I note that the same day that I brought to their attention a problem where someone had killed multiple critically endangered great hammerheads, they proudly released a press release saying that they had caught someone who had, or they had arrested someone who had caught 3 undersized lobster. But anyway, in 2012, when I first started looking into this, I was laughed at on the phone by a Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission law enforcement officer. But on July 1st, 2019, the the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission enacted new regulations that were largely the ones I wrote. So I want to talk about how we got from there to here. So my approach here was first to find the data gaps and do the science. You've heard about that in the first part of this talk, but that's not the end. The next part was to communicate these results to key stakeholders and decision makers, to get policymakers to agree to change the rules in general, which was itself quite challenging, and then to give them a series of possible rules to change too. So a key point here is that providing the scientific evidence that this was a problem was key. It was a vital first step, but it was not the end goal. Far too many scientists believe that publishing a paper is when the process stops. And you have to gather the evidence, you have to show that it's an issue, but you cannot stop there if your goal is environmental policy change. So the goal of my public engagement strategy overall was for as many people from key stakeholder groups as possible to learn the following 3 pieces of information. Current land-based shark fishing practices kill endangered species of sharks. There exists a series of alternative policies that can solve this problem without infringing on the rights of rule-following anglers. And finally, your help, public support, was needed to enact some of these changes. So I wrote a detailed, specific, data-driven, and politically achievable, that last part is critical, set of policy proposals for what we should do instead. And I widely distributed it to stakeholders, the media, and decision makers, along with lay summaries of this. So this idea of political achievability was baked in from the beginning. While I was writing this, I took law enforcement officers that I saw out at the beach out for a beer to pick their brain about it. I talked to state environmental attorneys about this. I talked to recreational angling groups to say, hey, I know you're skeptical of rules that reflect or that restrict angling, but would you be okay with this? And this was a key point, having this detailed document written already, because FWC, I think, was not expecting this. They said, all right, fine, you've convinced us that it's worth discussing, maybe we should change these rules. What do you think we should do instead? And this is a point where many scientists get tripped up and say, oh, I don't know, we need new, stronger rules. I said, here is a specific, detailed referenced document that says what we should do instead. I know a subsequent analysis that a colleague has done of the public discourse surrounding this issue found that almost, I think something like 20% of all the public comments that were written in support of this policy change quoted word for word some of the talking points that I distributed associated with this, a clear example of impact. I also did a lot of media outreach associated with this, speaking with dozens of journalists and writing some articles myself, such as this Slate one you saw earlier. I wrote a variety of blog posts about this. I'm a senior writer for Southern Fried Science, one of the most widely read science blogs. These blog posts contain detailed information on the problem, the proposed solution, how our readers can help, and critically, why some arguments against doing this that they were likely to hear from members of the fishing community were not true. We called that proactive debunking. The ability to write my own detailed long form articles was critical here, because when you speak to journalists, they'll include a soundbite or two from you, but for technical, detailed, nuanced things, being able to write 1,000 words on all parts of it yourself was critical here. I also did a variety of public science engagements, speaking to thousands of Florida residents through public talks, nerd nights, evening with a scientist at the museum, things like that. I wrote an op-ed for the Revelator again. Some folks in some policy circles seem to believe that an op-ed is a much more serious form of writing than a blog post, though really functionally it's not all that different. The op-ed stressed that there is a problem, this is what we should do about it, and why arguments against doing something about it are wrong. I got 2 professional societies, the Society for Conservation Biology Marine Section and the American Elasmobranch Society, to formally write in statements of support. I wrote the first drafts of these statements of support and approved the final drafts, and I was able to do that because I had long served on the policy committees for both professional societies. So these sort of scientist sign-on letters or professional society statements of support do not by themselves often make a difference, but they can be a valuable part of a science-based conservation campaign's arsenal by saying, look, it's not just me that's saying this, it's this professional society that's the largest in the field agrees that this is something we should do. Critically, I was able to get Senator Marco Rubio's office to get involved with this, as well as mainstream angling groups that are responsible angling groups that you might think would oppose any sort of new regulations. Without this, we probably would not have been able to do it. The FWC was composed of then Governor Rick Scott's appointees. This is not an environmentally friendly group of people. And if all I got was members of the environmental community to sign on it, this may well have been ignored. But getting Senator Rubio's office involved helped, and getting these mainstream angling groups involved helps, even if it meant sacrificing a little bit of what I wanted. Probably the hardest part in all of this was avoiding stepping on each other's toes. As I noted throughout this, it's not just me that was doing this. It was a diverse coalition that had many different wants and needs and reasons and proposed solutions. So we talk to each other a lot to make sure, even on areas where we don't agree, we stay out of each other's way. And this was probably the hardest part of the whole thing. So success here required some skills not commonly taught to academics. It was vital that I know the science and know how to gather new data. All students know how to do that. But I also needed to learn, what are the current laws? What's the process of getting FWC to agree to change the regulations? And what is every step of the process? How did the decision makers decide? Who do they listen to? What type of evidence have they ignored? Who likes who? Who hates who? Knowing how to speak to journalists and how to find appropriate journalists was vital to this process. Knowing how to speak to the public and how to write to the public and how to tailor a message for different groups was vitally important. I gave this a PowerPoint explaining this issue to thousands of Floridians, once to the Miami Sierra Club, once to a Rotary Club of Miami-Dade, and once to a Florida Keys Fishing Club. These are very, very different groups, and knowing how to tailor the argument to them was very important. Critically here, one person need not have all these skills on their own if you work as part of a team. But in this case, I did develop many of these skills on my own. I also want to stress that if you want to learn how to do this, I offer professional development training focusing on many of these issues. So overall here, it is possible for a graduate student research to make a difference, but it requires a variety of skills not commonly taught to academics. In conclusion, recreational shark fishing is a much bigger deal than a lot of people said it was when we started our research. And by finding evidence and strategically communicating that evidence, we were able to change Florida laws to protect endangered species. If you'd like to learn about the specifics of the rule changes that were implemented, that is included in detail in that conservation science and practice paper. I would like to thank many collaborators, co-authors, mentors, and partners who helped generate the data that I presented here. I'd also like to thank the Elasmo Week organizing team for inviting me to speak to you today. I'd like to thank the many sources of funding that generated this research. Yes, that is Sharknado 2. The producers of Sharknado 2, the second one, contributed to some of my PhD research. I especially want to highlight the Liber Eero postdoctoral fellowship in conservation science, which gave me some of the policy and media training needed to do this work. I know that they are currently accepting applications until, I believe, November. This is a wonderful program, and I'm happy to answer anyone's questions about it. Thank you very much for listening. If you would like to learn more about any of this, I invite you to visit my website, shoot me an email, or find me on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at Why Sharks Matter. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of Elasma Week.